to talk about the Cleveland Browns. He's got a very rosy prediction for the Browns. To talk about the take on Ohio State, Texas, we head out to the fan hotline.
And we'll talk to Danny Kanell. Danny coming on courtesy of BetOnline. Check out betonline.ag for updated college football playoff, win totals, conference, Heisman, and college football week 1 lines.
Danny, welcome to the show.
How we doing, fellas? I like that get crappy with Zappy. It's kind of like suck for luck, some of those tank for Tua. Like we've seen some mantras before across NFL franchises. I kind of like that, get crappy with Zappy. That's a good one. I like that.
I feel like if we do one for Shedeur, I'm going to get fired. So I think it's got to be get crappy for Zappy.
Yes, I like that. I think that could be a good one.
Now, before we get to college football, I know you had a very rosy opinion of the Browns hitting the over this year. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. You said 8 to 9 wins. Am I correct in that?
Correct, which I don't think is that crazy. So I was actually given a stat. And I'm curious if you guys have heard this. I mean, you probably have because you guys are way more dialed in to the Browns than I am. Are you aware of Joe Flacco's stats over his last 17 starts? You guys have you seen that?
I have seen that.
He's over like 4,000 yards. He's got 30 touchdowns. Like if you put them together and compared them last year, he would have been top 5 in every passing category, except he also would have been number 1 in interceptions because he did have a lot of interceptions over the course of those games. I still think he's got some game left in him. I think he fits really well with Stefanski, what he wants to do. And I still think they could be competitive. And at the age of 40, I think 40 is the new 30 in the NFL because it's a game that's not the way it used to be where you just got lit up and it was such a physical game. I think that's why it's becoming way more commonplace for teams to give quarterbacks in their late 30s and early 40s opportunity because they're so protected. And there is a massive advantage to having the brain capacity and the knowledge of knowing everything you're going to see, being so familiar with a system, knowing where to get with the football, that that's the luxury of being around the league for 15 or 20 years. You know everything that's coming at you. You know how to predict and kind of anticipate what looks you're getting, what checks to get into. I think that's something that's completely undervalued with Joe Flacco. Not to mention, I still think he can sling it a little bit.
So the bet here is just on Joe Flacco alone, essentially.
Yes, I do. I think Joe Flacco. I am not a Shedeur Sanders hater, but I do think, I don't know how you guys feel about it. I have been exhausted by the amount of conversation and airspace that has been wasted on national shows. I get it if you're talking about him locally, but when was the last time you heard a 5th-round pick who is battling for the 3rd or 4th spot consuming national shows on whether he's getting the roster and is there a conspiracy theory with the play calling and when is he getting playing time? It's been so absurdly over the top. It's just almost hard to bear. So maybe I find myself rooting for Joe Flacco, but I just think Shedeur, and I would say Dylan Gabriel to this extent too. I did value Shedeur. I thought he was a better NFL prospect, but long term, I think if they had half the career that Flacco had, they would be doing jumping jacks. I think that would be an amazing success for them. I think they're more kind of backup quarterbacks for the majority of their career that could play a really long time. That's why I think they could be spot starters. I don't know if I see either Dylan Gabriel or Shedeur, being a guy that you're going to break the bank and spend that $250, $300 million for as your franchise quarterback for the next decade.
Danny, I do want to get to a fair amount of college football here, but we had this conversation at the beginning of the show because I think the Browns have told us they want ball control. They want a heavy emphasis on run. After last year, they want to try and minimize the turnovers to a excessive level. And I think that's interesting because so much of what you mentioned with Joe is there is the no risky, no bisky. There is the he might throw you 40 touchdowns, but he might throw you 20 interceptions. Do you let Joe Flacco cook this year, or do you try and, I don't want to say risk neutering him in the name of, turning down those turnovers?
Well, see, that's where I think you trust Flacco, and that's something that young quarterbacks always have a very tough time learning, and it's sort of a skill of the risk-reward aspect of when to take those shots versus when to pull it down. I mean, Brett Favre never really learned it. He was kind of always that gunslinger. You kind of took the good with the bad. That is not what you're looking for from Joe Flacco. But I do feel like in some of those games that he put up some of those numbers over the last 17 starts that he's had, he was put in adverse situations where you're kind of putting him out there to chuck it around. You're kind of playing from behind. So it makes it a little bit more understandable. I would expect him to clean up a lot of those interceptions as long as the Browns are competitive in the games. And I do think with the run game they bring and a defense which is pretty salty, I do think they can be in a lot of one-possession games, and that's where the advantage of experienced quarterback comes into play.
Danny, over to college football. There's a lot of new in the Ohio State-Texas game. Ohio State's got 8 new starters. Texas has basically a whole brand-new offensive line, just one returning starter there, and obviously 2 new quarterbacks. We've seen a little bit of Arch Manning. We've seen very, very little of Julian Sayin. What's your early read when it seems like it's almost impossible to gauge how good these teams are going to be?
It's so tough. I mean, I was doing a breakdown of the game yesterday and was looking position by position, like who do you give the edge to? And, it was like I gave the edge at quarterback to Arch Manning because at least, like you said, we've seen him a little bit more. I gave the edge at wide receiver to Ohio State because they've got Jeremiah Smith. But it was really tight because Texas has some pretty good young wide receivers too. Running backs, I gave a slight edge to Texas because they have a guy coming back in Trey Wisner and a guy back from injury in C.J. Baxter. But offensive line, it was almost a toss-up. Defense, really close. They both have a lot of question marks. Did give the edge to Texas there. But overall, when you tally them all up, it was still split right down the middle. So it is a really hard game to handicap, as well as it is hard to handicap most of the teams that are in the top 10, top 15, because a lot of teams have question marks. That's why I think this season is set up to be maybe one of the more entertaining seasons that we've seen in my 15 years covering college football because it's so wide open. I do think, for me, I trust Ohio State more because they're playing at home. Even with a new quarterback, being able to communicate at the line of scrimmage is such an advantage. Being able to have a third down where if you have to check the protection, your offensive line can hear you no problem whatsoever. With some new members in offensive line in Texas, that will not be the case for Arch Manning. When he's trying to operate, it's going to be much tougher to communicate. For his tackles, it's going to be very hard for them they're breaking in some new tackles as well. It's going to be very hard for them to have clean, get-offs because they're going to be struggling to hear Arch Manning. They'll probably go silent counts. Then they have to watch the edge rushers for Ohio State to try to go off reaction. Those things make it really, really challenging. So I think this game is really evenly matched. And the point spread shows you why. I mean, you get 3 points for home field, and they give Ohio State 2.5. So even the odds makers are thinking it's exactly down the middle.
Danny Kanell on the fan hotline here with us, getting you ready for Ohio State, Texas. I thought it was interesting it's taken this long to get here, but it does seem like this week we've started to hear pushback on the Arch Manning hype based off what people saw last year in limited play or based off just the idea of the changes there in Texas. Do you still believe that the Arch Manning hype is substantiated, even though we haven't seen, I think it's over 100 career passing attempts from him?
I think it's so over the top. And it's impossible. I feel bad for Arch Manning because he really hasn't asked for any of it. And I do have to give him a ton of credit because I think he's handled it really, really well. He's said and done all the right things, and yet media just gravitates to him. I cannot remember. Tebow had some hysteria, but that was really after they won the championship and he won the Heisman. Then it sort of blew up. Same thing with Johnny Manziel, who had hysteria around him, but that was sort of after he broke out. Nobody even knew who Johnny Manziel was when he took over the starting role for A&M. I kind of have to go outside the sport of football and look at a guy like LeBron James, who was on the cover of Sports Illustrated as a high schooler, to remember anybody with this sort of expectations heaped upon him. And I think it's impossible for him to meet those expectations. And I, for one, am one that thinks Texas, it could be more of a roller coaster ride for them. I think he's going to have first-year starter struggles just like everybody else does. I know he's played some, and he's been at Texas for 30 months, so he feels pretty comfortable in that system. But he really doesn't have that extensive experience. And even when he did, they did give him an opportunity versus Georgia last year at home. And in that game, he looked pretty overwhelmed, just like Quinn Ewers did. He didn't look like a superstar in that game. I think if the sky is the limit for what he could be, but I think it's going to be much more of a roller coaster ride for Texas, which is why I actually have them at 9-3 and missing the playoffs. Their schedule's a little bit tougher this year. I think last year, as much as people just were willing to discard Quinn Ewers, he stepped up in big moments for them and got them a couple big wins. I go back to last year at Michigan in the Big House. He played spectacular in that game. In the playoffs, they had a fourth down conversion to save the game. Their season was on the line. They had to have a touchdown, and he gave it 2 years ago. He goes into Tuscaloosa, throws 3 touchdown passes, and I get the upside that you want to have Arch, and I do think there's a higher upside with Arch Manning, but I think people are totally discounting the quality play they got at Quinn Ewers for the majority of his career.
2 years ago, Michigan won the national title and sent the most players to the NFL draft. Last year, Ohio State won the national title, sent the most players to the NFL draft. Has the Big Ten passed the SEC as far as not only the quality of players, but now you look at the teams, and even teams like Penn State are at the top for this upcoming year?
I mean, I think it's unequivocally yes. It's interesting that the SEC, for a long time, they love to talk about the national championships and how many they had won consecutively, or how many they'd won 13 of 15. And, they're touting all these statistics, and all of a sudden they're trying to move the goalposts and saying, well, we have a tougher schedule and we've got tougher players, but they're not winning the national championships. And even more so, they're not even getting there. And I think the thing that has changed dramatically is the transfer portal and the NIL era, where you cannot hoard talent the way the SEC did through their run of dominance. And in large part, a lot of it for a long time was done illegally. Everybody knew what was happening, but they were buying the best players in the country and able to hoard them. And I think there's a lot of schools. Clearly, there have been a lot of schools in the Big Ten that have been doing it as well. But from top to bottom, I would say more of the schools in the Big Ten were trying to do things the right way, or didn't have the resources to have bagmen to go out there and make those cash payments. Well, now that that's sort of been leveled and everybody's above board and the Big Ten can buy players too legally, I think that has absolutely leveled it. I do think the SEC is deeper, slightly deeper than the Big Ten. But watch out for a lot of those middle-of-the-pack teams in the Big Ten, because I think they've made some significant strides in narrowing the gap of both the SEC and the top of the Big Ten. I think absolutely the Big Ten needs to be taken seriously. If you're not, I'm willing to say they're the better conference in the SEC, but I think at the bare minimum, you have to say they're on level playing field with the SEC.
Danny, one of the I guess narratives last year that happened with Ohio State, with all the talent they had, all the wealth of the $30 million roster, whatever it was, is that it almost didn't matter who the quarterback was, because there was just such a wealth of talent on both sides of the ball, and also including the wide receiver and running back room. Do you, if you believe that was true last year, do you feel the same way this year with what Julian Sayin has around him?
No, because I do think there's so many new pieces. There's so many moving parts. And I do think Jeremiah Smith is the best football player in the country. And if I was talking to Julian Sayin, I would say find him early and often, and even if he's double or triple covered, just you have to force the ball to him. And I think Ryan Day will do that, and Brian Hartline. But mentioning Brian Hartline, you also have a new play caller, which this is a pretty significant shift, because at least with Chip Kelly last year, he had been a play caller before. Brian Hartline is entering entirely new territory. And I do think you'll see Ryan Day step in more, whether it's on game day, whether it's in the game plan. I do think you'll see Ryan Day be more involved with the offense to kind of make sure that transition is pretty smooth. But you also did have that roster, which had so much talent around there. I think even Emeka Egbuka, who probably didn't get enough credit, eventually ended up being a first-round draft pick, probably didn't get enough recognition. You had both backs in the running in the backfield, which were so good. And then you had the leadership on the defensive guys like JTT and Jack Sawyer, who were there on the defensive side of the ball. That team just really had a very clear-cut identity. So I do think it's a little unfair to Julian Sayin just to expect him to step into that offense and things to go perfectly for him. Because much like I said with Arch Manning, I think it could be a little bit bumpy for Julian Sayin as he's trying to figure things out, and a lot of the pieces around him are trying to get sorted out as well.
Danny, I'm so torn on Penn State because I love Drew Aller. He's from just down the road in Medina County, where I reside, where I'm from. He's got, I think, everything you need to be a really good quarterback in the pros, and yet I do not trust James Franklin as far as I can throw him, and I can't throw him very far. Where do you sit on Aller and whether he has the goods to take Penn State to the elite level, maybe even compete for a national title this year?
They are my national championship pick. Like, I am picking Penn State. So if you're asking me if I'm a believer, I'm saying yes. But I do think it is a step of faith on my part to trust that Drew Aller is going to take that next step. Because if there's been one issue, I know James Franklin, he's 1-15 against top 5 teams since he's been at Penn State, and that's been a record that he has got to change that narrative. And even last year with their success that they had, they still haven't done that because they haven't been able to beat those teams that are better than him. But Drew Aller, the problem that he's had is he has vanished on the big stages. Whether it was against Ohio State, whether it's been against Michigan, whether it's been with an opportunity to have the game-winning drive against Notre Dame, instead he throws an interception. Like, he just has not, and without a completion to a wide receiver, he has not stepped up in that role. But I do think there's a few things why I think he can take that next step. One thing is his familiarity with the offensive coordinator, Andy Koltnicki. Last year was year 1, and I thought Andy Koltnicki did a really good job of getting scheming guys open. And I think he's going to be much more comfortable in that system, operating with confidence without having to think so much. They also went to the portal and got him 3 wide receivers, so hopefully they boosted that position. They're going to need a lot of receiving production because Tyler Warren, the tight end, was a phenomenal weapon that Andy Koltnicki used. But the reason I like Penn State as a whole, one, I do think Allard takes that next step. Sometimes it takes time. And I think the Big Ten championship was actually a game which he played pretty well in, even though they lost. I thought he stepped up and made some big throws. I think they have a lot of commonalities with what you saw from Michigan and Ohio State. You see a bunch of players, the backfield, and Nick Singleton and Katron Allen. You see a guy like their center, Nick Dawkins, some players around the roster that could have maybe made that jump to the NFL. They decide to come back, and there's sort of this mantra, this belief of we want to come back to do something special. And that was the exact same thing you saw from Michigan and Ohio State. Plus, the schedule is as favorable as anybody in the country, and I do think that matters. They really have a 2-game schedule with Ohio State on the road and Oregon at home. I think they split that. I think they could lose at the shoe, but I think they get the best of them of Ohio State in the championship game and the Big Ten championship game. And I think this is James Franklin's year to finally silence some of those critics.
Danny, great stuff, buddy. And a lot of that's because you just said nice things about the quarterback I like. But we really appreciate you, buddy. Great stuff.
Awesome, man. Enjoy the games this weekend. Great catching up.
Thank you so much. Danny Kanell there on the Fan Hotline.